Welcome to Wandering Jews at J-Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
I'm Sorrel. From the panoramic view at Mirador del Valle, a postcard picture view of a city that reminds you of a folktale from long ago greets you in all of its glory. That city is Toledo. Below the castle walls, towers, and steeples of Toledo, the Tagus River embraces the city, and Alcantara Bridge and San Martin Bridge leads visitors over the water, along the cobblestone paths and up the winding hill to the city celebrated and shrouded in romance.
The San Martin Bridge brings us to the Jewish quarter, the Juderia of Toledo, the neighborhood that was the center of Jewish life throughout the medieval period. From the Muslim conquest of Toledo in 711 CE, through the Catholic seizure of Toledo by Alfonso VI, the king of Leon and Castile, and until the expulsion of the Jews from Toledo and all of Spain on 31st March 1492.
Besides being one of Spain's most beautiful and historic cities, Toledo is known by the Jews as the Jerusalem of Spain. It was a profoundly important center of Jewish life, learning, and culture.
So true, and based on the historical records, at the peak of Toledo's Jewish community's prosperity, it's estimated that there may have been over 10 synagogues and 7 houses of study. And walking through the streets of Toledo today, although it's not like it was then, obviously, one can imagine a Friday afternoon in Toledo's Jewish quarter. People bringing home food before Shabbat, returning from having visited the ritual baths, the mikvaot, parents gathering children from school, and neighbors calling out Shabbat Shalom as they swept the thresholds of their homes and their shaded courtyard gardens.
You've painted such a vivid scene, but if we go back to under the first Muslim rulers of Toledo, we're talking about that being a pretty picture. It was actually, a fairly peaceful time for Jews under Islamic law. Jews and Christians, they were known as the dhimmi, the protected community, and they were recognized by the Muslim regimes as monotheists, as people of the book. They were allowed to practice their respective faiths and organize communally. However, it did come with a caveat, right? They were also obliged to pay communal taxes to the Muslim rulers as a recognition of, at the end of the day, they were subservient and Islam had supremacy over them.
Later waves of Muslim rulers, they tended to be less tolerant than their predecessors. However, in many cases, Jewish communities, they were seen in a more positive light as compared to the Christian Visigoths. On the one hand, Islamic scholars questioned whether or not Christianity was a monotheistic religion, particularly because of that complicated knot of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Muslims asked, well, wait, how can Christians be monotheists if they accept the notion that God is made up of 3 aspects or 3 beings? Judaism, in the eyes of Islam, was in no doubt a pure monotheism, like Islam. In addition, and maybe more importantly, Muslim rulers also recognized the economic, political benefit of the Jewish communities of Iberia. Jews were literate. They knew languages. They had ties to far-off places with their own Jewish communities. And this trans-global civilizational network put Jews at the center of not only trade, but also of diplomacy, and also at the center of advanced fields of study, like astronomy, like navigation, and medicine.
Medieval Spain was often a battlefield, and wars between rival Muslim taifas, ruling houses, and between Christian kingdoms, and between Muslims and Christians were numerous. Picture the political intrigues and battling between ruling houses in the Game of Thrones, and you have some picture, some inkling of what medieval Iberia was like. Minus the dragons, that is. Toledo fell to Christian forces on the 25th of May, 1085, when it was conquered by the forces of King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile.
This event, the conquest of Toledo, was really a pivotal moment in the Reconquista, the Catholic reconquest. The sense among the Christian rulers of Spain that their campaigns were part of righting a historic wrong, that they were taking back Spanish territories from Muslim invaders and returning them to their rightful Christian owners.
Right. And the fall of Toledo marked the first major conquest of a significant Muslim city by Christian kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula. It held immense symbolic and strategic importance as Toledo had been the former capital of the Visigothic kingdom before the Muslim conquest in the 8th century. So its capture significantly shifted that balance of power in favor of the Christian kingdoms and paved the way for further Christian expansion to the south.
In the centuries following the Christian conquest of Toledo, some sense of the importance of preserving these very fragile interrelationships between the various communities, between the rulers of Toledo and especially their Jewish subjects, remained in place. What became known as the School of Translators, it wasn't a specific building or an academic body, but it's one example of the role that Jews played in the cultural and intellectual life of Toledo and Spain.
Right. Like you said, it wasn't a formal institution, but the Toledo School of Translators was rather a dynamic, centuries-long intellectual movement, right? Primarily flourishing in the 12th and 13th centuries, Toledo transformed into this hub where Arabic and Hebrew texts laden with the accumulated wisdom of ancient philosophy, groundbreaking science, and profound religious thought were meticulously translated into Latin and vernacular Castilian from Arabic. This monumental endeavor acted as a critical conduit, funneling vital knowledge from the sophisticated Islamic and Jewish worlds directly into Christian Europe of the so-called Dark Ages, igniting the sparks of the European Renaissance. The School of Translators and their work were also a driving force in the historic development of Castilian into Spanish as a modern language.
The impact of the Toledo School of Translators was immense. For the first time, European universities could incorporate a wide range of classics into their curricula.
Fascinating.
Islamic and Jewish theology had already been influenced by Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Plato through Arabic translations. Now scholars in Christian Europe, Roger Bacon, Thomas Aquinas, they gained access to Latin and Castilian translations of both Greek and Arab philosophers like, for example, Ibn Sina, like, for example, the Jewish philosopher Maimonides, and it led to the integration of classical thought, Plato, Aristotle, among others, into Christian theology.
And it went so much further than theology, right? Because it was also profoundly affecting the emerging fields of scientists and astronomers, including Copernicus, benefited from the newly available translations of Greek and Arabic astronomical texts. The books translated in Toledo served as essential textbooks in European universities for centuries, particularly in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and other sciences.
Besides diverse literature, Arab scholars introduced Europe to approaches to experimentation and new numeral systems. The decimal numeric system was a significant departure from the Roman numeral system. The concept of zero, invented in India in the 6th century CE, was adopted in Europe through Arabic mathematic texts. The word zero entered the English language through French and Italian. Zero is a contraction of the Venetian zero. Zero was borrowed from the Arabic sifr, and sifr originally meant empty. Ironically, a concept literally about nothing. And you know me, when I have an opportunity, gotta paraphrase Seinfeld, it's a number about nothing. Yet difficult to imagine the modern world without zero, without the power of nothing.
Wow. And, you know, we're talking about tolerance, right, between the religious communities. In medieval Spain, that was a glass unicorn. It was highly valued, but it was also precarious, right? It was easily damaged and broken. So, you know, like when we zoom out and look at history in general, this tolerance was not a deeply rooted, democratically based ethos, but rather a collection of interests woven, you know, shared agendas, and often unraveled as we see also in history, political, military, economic interests shifted.
Again, under Muslim rule, times changed, regimes shifted, and particularly with the arrival of fundamentalist Islamic groups like the Almoravid and the Almohad dynasties from 1085, Toledo's Jewish community, while initially experiencing periods of tolerance, they faced increasing hardship, including forced conversions and expulsions. Many Jews fled Toledo and from across Spain, including the family of Moses Maimonides, who we mentioned above, the outstanding scholar, philosopher, community leader, scientist, physician, whose family fled Spain for more hospitable lands.
And during the early Christian periods after Toledo's conquest in 1085, despite having some degree of royal protection, the Jewish community endured sporadic but violent massacres by urban mobs or crusaders in 1090, 1108, and 1212. So yes, we have this intellectual collaboration that we talked about, the Toledo School of Translators, right? But it also started to take on more sinister tones of the start of legal and economic discrimination, especially intensifying after 1273.
The 14th century brought devastating change, the Black Death, and the unknown fear of a plague that slaughtered millions all across Europe. And of course, in many, many places, the Jews were blamed. Violent pogroms and widespread anti-Jewish riots began to spread. 1391 resulted in massacres, forced baptisms for most of Toledo's Jews. This decline, it culminated in the 1449 Sentencia Estatuto de Toledo, formalizing a discrimination based on Jewish blood. And it was in Toledo that phrase, Jewish blood, is criminalized. And an early foundation stone is placed in the development of what becomes the monstrous mating between racism and anti-Semitism that continued to infect Europe up until the period of the Holocaust and beyond. Ultimately, the 1492 Alhambra Decree expels all remaining practicing Jews from Spain, effectively ending centuries of Jewish life in Toledo and in Spain writ large.
Let's fast forward and imagine ourselves, we like to take our groups, right, to Toledo. So let's imagine we're crossing the bridges of Toledo and we're ascending the hill towards the city. You can picture those cobblestone streets that lead us to the area named the City of the Jews, in Arabic, Madinat al-Yahud, the Juderia or Jewish quarter. There are 2 synagogues today that still stand as architectural witnesses to the Jewish life that once was in Toledo in medieval times.
The Ibn Shushan synagogue is believed to be one of the oldest surviving synagogue buildings in Europe, possibly dating back to the 12th or early 13th century. The synagogue flourished as a vital center for the Jewish community of Toledo for nearly 200 years. The Ibn Shushan is renowned for its distinctive architectural style, featuring 5 naves with horseshoe arches supported by octagonal pillars. The Ibn Shushan synagogue's uniqueness lies in that it was an early and very sophisticated, beautiful application of what became known as Mujadar style to a Jewish religious building, featuring an unusual multi-aisled plan, distinctive octagonal pillars, and rich stucco decoration that beautifully merges diverse artistic traditions.
So what is this term mudeja? It actually refers to a distinctive artistic and architectural style that emerged in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, between the 12th and 17th century, and is characterized by the fusion of Christian, that would be the Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance, and Islamic artistic elements.
It's interesting, the term itself comes from the Arabic word mudajain, meaning one permitted to remain, or one who is subjugated or tamed. It originally referred to the Muslims who remained in areas that had been conquered by Christian kingdoms during the Reconquista, but were allowed to continue practicing their religious customs, obviously with certain restrictions. These very skilled Muslim artisans and craftsmen applied their traditional techniques and design sensibilities to buildings, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian, creating this unique hybrid style.
In that light, it's funny when we think about the origin of the term mudeja. It's curious that this, unique Iberian architecture has become, to many, a symbol of these complex relationships and very precarious tolerance between Muslims, Christians, and Jews in medieval Spain. And we're talking about the Ibn Shushan synagogue, which was ultimately converted into a church in the 15th century. Today is known as the Synagoga de Santa Maria la Blanca.
The conversion of the Ibn Shushan synagogue to the church named for St. Mary the White, Santa Maria la Blanca, is a somewhat stark illustration of the changing fortunes of the Jewish community in Spain, particularly during the late Middle Ages.
So if we look at the events that led up to the synagogues being converted into a church, we can point to the widespread anti-Jewish riots of 1391. These riots, incited by powerful anti-Jewish preachers like Ferran Martinez, began in Seville and spread rapidly throughout the Iberian Peninsula, including Toledo. Jewish quarters were attacked, resulting in massacres, forced conversions, and the seizure of Jewish property, including synagogues.
Sources vary on the exact year. It's generally agreed that the Ibn Shushan synagogue was converted into a Christian church between 1405 and 1411. This conversion was not a peaceful transition, but a direct consequence of the violence and pressure from the Christian authorities and the populace against the Jews and the Jewish community. The name Santa Maria la Blanca, the White, symbolized the idea that the synagogue in Toledo was purified. It was made white from its Jewish past, and as it adopted a new, deliberate Christian identity.
And this conversion into a Christian church didn't happen in isolation. It was part of a broader pattern across Spain where synagogues were being appropriated by the Catholic Church and transformed into churches, especially following, like we said, the mass conversions that occurred after 1391 and the intensified anti-Jewish campaigns led by figures like Vincent Ferre in the early 15th century. The conversion of the Ibn Shushan synagogue, when we're standing there with a group, right, it stands as that powerful physical reminder. The absence is kind of glaring, right? What's missing? It's testimony to the decline of the once flourishing Jewish presence in Toledo.
Today, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Toledo remains the owner and custodian of the Synagogue of Santa Maria la Blanca. While the building no longer functions as a place of worship for any faith, it is preserved and open to the public as a museum and a significant historic site. Although there have been discussions and desires from the Jewish community regarding its symbolic return, the synagogue's ownership and management continue to reside with the Archdiocese.
Let's take a walk now. And we're walking from the Ibn Shushan synagogue, and now we're heading towards 5-minute walk. We're standing now at the portal of the Synagogue of El Transito, Synagoga del Transito, built in the 14th century, round about 1357, by Samuel Halevi Abulafia, treasurer to King Pedro of Castile. This synagogue is a magnificent example of the Mudejar architecture, blending Islamic and Jewish artistic styles. It houses a Sephardic museum, which it currently is known as, dedicated to the history and culture of the Jews of Spain.
The El Transito synagogue is unusual for several reasons. First of all, it is a kind of pinnacle of this Mudejar style. Exquisite example, the stucco work, the geometric patterns, the Arabic inscriptions in a synagogue create an amazing fusion of Islamic and Jewish art, and they do reflect something about the unique coexistence that took place, at least in certain moments, in medieval Spain. The bilingual inscriptions. The walls are adorned with extensive, intricate inscriptions in Hebrew, biblical verses, psalms, prayers, and, again, Arabic devotional phrases. This bilingualism underscores the deep cultural and linguistic integration of Toledo's Jewish elite. They were as comfortable in Arabic as they were in any other language.
So the synagogue's monumental scale and lavishness attest to Samuel Halevi's immense wealth and influence, sanctioned by King Pedro I. Yet this grandeur tragically foreshadows the fragility of Jewish life, because it was converted into a church just decades before the 1492 expulsion. And then, if we're looking at it as a home, right? It's now the Synagoga del Transito is now home to the Sephardic Museum, preserving and interpreting the rich history and legacy of Spain's Jewish community. The museum is actually administered by the Spanish Ministry of Culture and Sport and owned by the Spanish state. Because of its outstanding historical significance, the El Transito was declared a national monument by the Spanish government at the end of the 19th century.
So I want to take us out of Toledo, at least for a moment.
Let's pack our bags.
Exactly.
Where are we going now, Scott?
So I want to go far to come back to Toledo eventually, and let's see if that makes sense.
Okay.
If we take a look at the American imagination, there is likely no more recognizable profile than the president's monument at Mount Rushmore. Completed in 1941, visitors traveled from around the world to view these gargantuan sculptures of selected American presidents: Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson, and Theodore Roosevelt. Each head stands at a height equivalent to a 5 or 6 story building.
However, it's also likely that few visitors, American or not, are aware that the area of Mount Rushmore is sacred land to the indigenous Sioux Nation. Although a United States treaty recognized the area of the Black Hills as part of the Great Sioux Reservation, that treaty was broken, and the area was ultimately confiscated by the United States government in 1877.
The United States Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Sioux Nation of Indians in 1980 that the Black Hills, today in South Dakota and northeastern Montana, had been illegally taken from the Sioux Nation. The court awarded the tribes over $100 million in compensation. Today, over $1 billion with interest. However, the Sioux Nation consistently refused to accept this monetary payment, asserting that the Black Hills are not for sale, and demanding the return of their land, the place that they call, quote, the heart of everything that is.
Let's now return to Toledo. The synagogues of Toledo were confiscated from the Jewish community in a period of acute intolerance and persecution. And ultimately, since 1492, the synagogues were used for a variety of purposes: churches, barracks, storehouses, often being left derelict. What they weren't used as were synagogues.
In Toledo today, there is no organized Jewish community. In Madrid, about an hour drive, there are some 5,000 Jews involved in several different synagogues across the city, representing waves of immigration, mainly from the end of the 19th century: Moroccan, North African, Eastern Europe. In more recent years, business people, students, and others from more established Jewish communities in the West.
Interestingly, in 26th of May 1931, 439 years since the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, the JTA, reported on, and I quote, "Spanish Jewry organizers, first meeting of Federation of Jewish Communities held in Madrid. Institute to be established for research into Spanish Jewish history and literature. Scholars all over the world to be invited to come to Spain to study Jewish records. Cultural mission to be sent to Sephardic communities abroad. Request to government to return for Jewish worship. Famous 14th century synagogue in Toledo, converted after Jewish expulsion into church and now maintains, as we mentioned about El Transito, as a national monument." So from 1931 until today, the organized Jewish community in Spain continues to be in discussions with both the Catholic Church, the Archdiocese of Toledo, and with Spanish authorities in order to secure the return or restitution of the Ibn Shushan and Transito synagogues back into the hands of the Jewish community.
The arguments put forth by the Federation of Jewish Communities in Spain for restitution are primarily symbolic. The organization views the return of Santa Maria la Blanca and the Transito as a symbolic gesture for reconciliation and interfaith dialogue, rather than immediate demand for its reestablishment as an active place of worship. And this acknowledges the current limited Jewish community in Toledo.
And in turn, the responses from the Catholic Church and the Spanish government, they've been very varied, right? Like the Archdiocese of Toledo has consistently maintained that the church's ownership of Santa Maria la Blanca is perfectly clear, citing the 1929 government restoration of the building to its care. While some church officials, such as the Archbishop of Madrid, have expressed a more conciliatory tone, emphasizing the need for dialogue and suggesting that Santa Maria la Blanca should serve as a meeting place. There's been no real indication of a willingness to transfer ownership.
Now, to be fair, Spain has come a long way in seeking to honor the Jewish past and the crimes committed against the Jews of Spain many centuries ago. The invitation to Jews able to prove Sephardic heritage to adopt Spanish and essentially European Union citizenship was active from 2015 till 2019. Across Spain, there is a development of Jewish-related tourism sites. However, since October 2023, critics point to what they see in Spain as a strong anti-Israel bias and perhaps anti-Semitic bias in Spanish positions vis-a-vis Israel, and particularly regarding Israel's war against the Hamas.
All that being said, the approach of the Federation of Jewish Communities in Spain suggests that they're not looking to necessarily restore, like we said, the original function of physical space. But again, to acknowledge, it would be an acknowledgement of historical injustice. It would promote reconciliation and it would reclaim a narrative. And that's not something that they're willing to back down on.
For the Toledo synagogues, a symbolic return or shared recognition could hold more profound meaning with regards to interfaith dialogue and historical memory than a purely functional restoration, especially considering the current demographics in Spain and the size of the small Jewish community. The shift from strict property law to broader moral, ethical, and cultural considerations about historical memory, intercommunal relations, that's really what the discussion is about. And that leads us to the larger question that's relevant not just when we visit Toledo and Spain, but really when we're visiting sites all across the Jewish world, and also when we're visiting Israel in a different way. Who owns the past? What does it mean to honor sites like the Black Hills or the synagogues of Toledo? And what does it mean for us when we visit these sites as part of our own search for Jewish meaning, connection, and the practice of Jewish memory when we stand outside their halls and walk inside, knowing that we have the privilege to tell the story of a Jewish community that was once rich and thriving, who suffered and was destroyed, and that by telling this story, we have the opportunity to somehow conjure the ghosts of the past.
And its absence can even enhance our Jewish memory and act as a prompt for us to kind of really dig deep, right? It's not physically in front of us, but we, in talking about ownership of the past, that is very much part and integral to who we are.
And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcus Freeze. I'm a member of the J Squared squad, and one of my responsibilities is helping us launch our new J Squared brand, which is J Squared Safaris in both Kenya and Tanzania. Check it out at jsquaredsafaris.com. I was asked to give you some top recommendations about digital tools and apps for your next J Squared journey. I've actually got two groups of recommendations, my hottest tips, and then some extra ones for the way. Let's dive in. Here's my first hot tip. Maybe you've got it, maybe you don't, but the Google Translate app for your phone is without doubt the number one tool when visiting another country. There are three ways of using the app. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. The first is type in some text, for example, in English and translate it, Spanish, Portuguese, or whatever language you need. The second way that you can use it is by taking a photo or even a live video. Think about a sign in the street or prices in the supermarket, and you're trying to understand what is written, so you can take a picture or move your phone in a live manner over the signage, and Google will translate that into English in real time for you. Here's the third way that you can use it, and a lot of people don't even know this, which is you can speak into the app. There's a small microphone icon. You can start talking in English, and it will produce for you that text in a spoken manner in another language. Quite amazing. I learned this tip from my mom, who learnt it from a maid in a hotel who took out her phone, spoke into the app in some language, and suddenly my mom starts hearing English, and she couldn't understand how. She taught me that. Thanks, Mom. Second up in my super hot tips is an app that allows you to store reservation information to do with your travel plans, maybe flights, car rental, hotels, restaurants, the like. Definitely helpful for a J-squared journey, but also any other travel that you do in your own life. Now, I've been a user of a particular product. It's called TripIt, TRIPIT.com, for nearly 15 years. I love it. There are both free and paid versions, and it's super easy to add your reservation information without having to print anything out. Now, if, like me, you don't like things printed out, TripIt's the perfect app. If, like my dad, you still print out every hotel reservation, then maybe this isn't one for you. Or maybe it should be. My third top tip is probably an app you have on your phone, you just haven't used it as much as you could, and that's the Google Maps app. Just think, you're a little bit lost in a place that you've never been to before, and you're just trying to get back to the hotel. Don't you need a really easy walking instructions-based app? Well, Google Maps, the one for you. Make sure to download it ahead of time. It even works in some offline ways as well, giving you the ability to not only plan where you may be walking, even driving, but being able to review that later. So those are the top 3 apps that I would put on my phone before even leaving home. So just a quick rundown of them again. That's Google Translate, TripIt, or other such apps that allow you to save your travel reservation details, and Google Maps. Now I'll go to my next list. These are definitely helpful, but not quite as hot a tips. So here's my second set of recommendations. Great apps, just not quite as hot tips as the previous list. The first is to do with what's called an eSIM or an electronic SIM. How do you get data when you're traveling away from home? Maybe you buy an international roaming plan from your home carrier. Well, that can be expensive. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. If the price looks like it's going to be high, and certainly beyond $5 a day, then you should consider buying an eSIM. In the past, we would often recommend getting a local SIM in the country that you were visiting. That was a physical card, a little bit more difficult to arrange ahead of time. These days, you get the equivalent SIM, but in a completely electronic and digital format that you can buy and activate ahead of time, and certainly for less than the international roaming charges of your home carrier. I'm not going to recommend a particular service. Just Google around for eSIMs and find out what's available for the country that you're going to. Second is WhatsApp, probably the world's most significant messaging app, although not so significant in the United States. It's owned by Meta, it's completely free, it's great for one-on-one messages, but I think where it stands out is in groups. Imagine on your next J-squared journey, there was a WhatsApp group with all the participants so that you can stay on time, stay in touch, or share helpful information with each other. Last, but by no means least, is the J-squared app. As an educational program organizer, we find it important to have a place where you can see and share charts, diagrams, maps, articles, and other useful information around the group. Maybe you'd use the Blackboard feature. Maybe you're going to use the app at home, on the bus, out in the field. Whichever way you choose to use the app, make sure you've downloaded and logged into that before you leave home. Once again, my name's Marcus from the J-Squared Squad, and it's been my pleasure to give you my top 6 digital tips. See you on the next J-Squared journey.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J-Squared Adventures website, That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.